Hello guys, welcome back to another episode here on African Confessions. There is a WhatsApp conversation that I had with one of our dear brothers. He was saying that he is from Zim. The following story that you are going to be listening to comes from a translation of that conversation that I had with one of our dear brother. The translation reads like this. Hello brother Nashi, how are you? Can you please post my story as anonymous and do not reveal my identity? My brother, I am a man who is from Zim. So as I was listening to one of the episode that you posted, you once said that if there is anyone who grew up as an orphan, that person should come to your inbox so that they can try to tell you what kind of a life that they had growing up as a person who didn't have both of their parents. So I am that kind of a person, my brother. I grew up as an orphan and life was very difficult because after the death of both of my parents who died in a bus accident, that was when one of my uncles, who was a brother to my father, took us in. So this uncle of ours, he had two houses. He had one of his houses that he had built in the villages, but he had chosen to build his own house in another village far away from most of his relatives. Then he had his other house that was in the city. At our parents' funeral, this uncle of ours had told all of my mother's relatives and our father's relatives that he wanted to take care of us because I had three of my brothers. They all passed away. I am the only one that is remaining. But after we had stayed with him in the city, because he had lied to our relatives that when he had taken us to the city, he wanted to take us to the good schools that can be found in the city. But once we were in the city, brother Nashi, that was when we found out that this was nothing but a lie. He had only taken us because he wanted us to assist him to be his unpaid workers there in the villages where he had built his homestead. That is what happened, because a few months after we then started staying with him in the city, he then took us to the village where his homestead was. Then we started working for him as people who would head his cattle and cultivate his crops without getting any salary at all. I just want to tell you the way that my parents passed away. It hurts me a lot because there was this other day when I was on Facebook. I was in one of those groups. So this group, it is just a normal group where people discuss all about the long distance buses that are from Zim. So there was one who put out a post, and the post was written like, if there is anyone who knows a bus that killed the most people in road accidents here in Zim, you can just type the name of that bus in the comment section. I then went into the comment section and I wrote the name of that bus that caused the death of my parents when it had an accident. And a lot of people were saying that the owner of that bus did a lot of rituals. The man used a lot of sacrifices so that his buses can be more popular than the other buses that were operating at that time. After I had written the name of that bus that caused the death of my parents when it had an accident, there was this other man who came to my inbox, not knowing if this man who came to my inbox is a relative to the owner of that bus company, because he then threatened me and he said, do not think that if we want to find you, we cannot find you because we know where to find you. Why do you want to tarnish the name of that bus company? Then that man stopped talking to me. But the only reason I had voiced out my frustration on that post, it was because I kept on asking myself as to what had happened if my parents had not been killed in that accident, the kind of a life that me and my brothers could have lived if our parents had not died in that road accident that had been caused by that bus. But that man came and he threatened me, but I didn't respond to him. My brother, the way that I grew up with my uncle, it was quite a tough life. So me and my brothers, we used to stay in the village, whilst our uncle and his family, they used to stay in the city. But I remember that there was this other time when my uncle came and fetched me from the village, and he went with me to his house there in the city. And from day one that our uncle had taken us from our house that our parents had built for us in the village before they had passed away, that uncle of ours had told us that we could not live with him in the main house. So at his house in the city, there was the main house, then there was a small cottage. This cottage, it was a 3-roomed cottage, and the other room was used by his maid, the other one was used by his gardener. Then there was a 3rd room. It was not like a room at all, it was just a room that was used so as to keep the tools that were used by the gardener and the maid. So whenever we were in the city, that is the room that was offered to us as our bedroom. It was quite a small room. What we used to do is that whenever we would be in the city, we had to move around the wheelbarrows and some of the garden tools so that you can find space to sleep. On that night, when my uncle had taken me from the village, going with me to his house there in the city, when we had arrived at his residency, he then told me that I could go to the cottage so that I can rest. I then left him sitting in the car. So the place where this cottage was from the main house, it is something like a 2-minute walk, because that yard was quite a big, because our uncle's compound was quite a very big compound. So from the main house going to the cottage, you would walk for about 2 minutes. And on that night, my brother, I only walked for about a minute because I was afraid of the dark. So I walked very fast from the place where I had left my uncle sitting in his car, going to that cottage. When I had arrived there, I then saw that the place where I was supposed to sleep in that room, it was quite dirty. I then looked for a broom and I saw that in that room there was no broom, so I then went outside. But what shocked me when I went outside, I then found out that my uncle was sitting in the tree. Just close to that small cottage, there was this very big avocado tree. So I do not even know how quickly my uncle had gotten off from his car and ran and came and climbed up that big avocado tree. And at first, I thought that maybe my uncle had been following me around. But what surprised me is that my uncle, the way that he was sitting, he was not even facing the direction of the cottage, but he was looking to the other side. And from the look of things, my uncle didn't even suspect that I had seen him, because he kept on sitting in that tree whilst he was looking into another direction. So I rushed back indoors because I was afraid of everything that I had seen. Then the very next morning, I woke up so early because I wanted to make sure what I had seen the previous night. So I started looking on the ground so that I can see if there was any footprints. But the only footprints that I saw were my own footprints, because after I had gotten into that cottage, because after I had gotten in that room where I was supposed to sleep, I had removed my shoes. So the only footprints that I could see on the ground were my footprints. There were no other footprints. So I do not know how my uncle had managed to get out of the car and came and climbed up that avocado tree without ever leaving any footprints on the ground. My brother, that is what I saw. The other thing that pains me the most is the way that my brothers died. So my other brother, when he died, he was busy herding cattle in the pastures, and he was then bitten by a snake, and that was when he passed away. And my other brother as well, he passed away. Instead of our uncle taking my brothers back to the village where my parents, before they had died, they had built a house for us. My uncle then chose that my brothers were not supposed to be buried back in the village where our parents left a house for us, but rather he chose that my brothers were supposed to be buried in that same village that he had built his own house. I have just rushed through my confession, Brother Nashi, because of time, but if I ever get the opportunity, I'll come back with part 2. Hi, dear listeners, right there was a message that I received. It was part of that conversation that I had with our dear brother, and we tried as much as we could to give you this translation. If you have any story that you want to share with us, please, you can just use the WhatsApp number that is appearing on your screen. Strange things do happen in this world.